All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have the one and only Marianne Williamson here with me on the show. For more than 4 decades, Marianne has been a leader of spiritually progressive circles. She's authored more than 16 books, as well as run for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States in both 2020 and 2024. Super excited to have you here. Hello, Marianne. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, we've been at this podcast about 10 years, and you were high on my wish list back in the early days of people I would love to have the opportunity to connect with. So this is awesome. This is an honor.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it finally happened.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, I'm going to kick things off here with my cliche opening question. And it is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
What's your what?
What's your passion?
Oh, what's your passion? Life is my passion. Trying to become the best I can while I'm here. Seeing the world improve. I think that very much right now, as it is for so many people, a deep awareness that things really need to turn around and the urgency of that task. I'm passionate about that.
That's a good passion. Well, if you would, certainly a lot of my listeners are familiar with you and your work, but I'm sure there's some out there who are not. So if you would take a moment and just share with us, whatever feels relevant to share about your backstory and how you ended up on such a unique path.
Well, in the 1970s, I encountered a set of books called A Course in Miracles for the first time. And talk about a passion, that certainly became a passion of mine. The Course doesn't claim any monopoly on truth. I think there's one truth spoken in many different ways. But the way the Course both explains and guides our thinking was a tremendous personal breakthrough for me. I never thought of it as anything that would lead to any kind of a professional effort, because for one thing, the kind of work that I do and that so many people do now, this work didn't even exist in the 1970s. So I had no career ambitions, associated with that. I didn't yet have career ambitions yet at all, much to my parents' chagrin. But, I was in my 20s. I was living life. And because I was such a passionate student of the Course in Miracles, one thing led to another. And ultimately, when I moved to Los Angeles in 1983, I started speaking about the Course, on the Course at the Metaphysical Research Center where I was working. And then I ended up writing a book based on my lectures. You told me before we got on that you wanted to hear a synchronicity story at the end of our conversation, and that will have to do with how my book became published. And then shortly after I started lecturing in Los Angeles, the AIDS crisis blew up in Los Angeles. Then my working on that issue as an AIDS activist in New York, etc. Because here we were studying and talking about miracles. We were talking about the fact that in the presence of love, amazing things happen. And so from that experience, in addition to my lecturing on A Course in Miracles, out of that grew a lot of nonprofit activism, first around AIDS, around peace, all kinds of things. And ultimately, I came to feel, and that included at one point a stint as a non-denominational spiritual teacher, minister at a Unity Church in Detroit for 6 years. And I began to recognize that a lot of the suffering I encountered in people, whereas during the days of AIDS and so forth, I encountered a lot of suffering, but it was the exception and not the rule in people's lives. And it seemed like that was a time in America when crises were the exception rather than the rule. Somewhere towards the end of the last century, I began to encounter people and see my country be a place where and for whom crises were the normal course of events, one crisis after another, that the crises in people's lives were not the exception, but rather the rather the rule. It wasn't just that you were sick, it was that you had no health care. It wasn't just that you couldn't find a job, it's that you couldn't find a job that paid a living wage. You'd have to get 2 or 3 jobs.
Right.
So I began to recognize that many of the root causes of problems that people were experiencing had to do with bad public policy. And where I had always been interested in politics, I never saw my own talents, my own expertise, my own willingness to serve as best used within that sector.
Right.
And I began to see that if that field does not transform, then all these other areas of transformation that we're talking about, while extremely important, will not have the kind of desired planetary effect that we all wish to see.
Right.
I found from those experiences in politics that the net's going to be a lot harder to crack than most people have any idea.
Yeah.
That the resistance to transformation is so much greater, I think, than the average American has any idea.
Yeah.
But I am not left with the sense that the effort was not or is not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say it's very bold of you and very brave to traverse that realm, right? The political realm. I mean, to come from someone who's this, well-known spiritual teacher, and it's just such a gap to bridge. I mean, you really, it's very ambitious, and I applaud you for being bold enough to step into that arena of sharks, right? It's sort of like, this idea comes to mind of, where does a lighthouse go? It belongs in the darkness. And there's a lot of darkness in that realm.
Well, it's interesting because when people tell me I was very brave, if I had realized what awaited me this time, I don't think I would have had the courage. Yeah. But I didn't, because when I ran in 2020, I think, given that I was a minor candidate, that I was treated relatively fairly. I had enough exposure on CNN, enough exposure on MSNBC. I had a CNN town hall. The viciousness of the system was not pointed at me because they didn't take me seriously enough to feel the need to do that.
Yeah.
This time I saw things that are genuinely disturbing in terms of how there are gatekeeping entities in our society that truly do form an obstruction to democracy.
Yeah.
And having experienced all that, I'm still processing. I understand that I heard a John Donahue poem where he's talked about seeing the insight in every situation. So I'm well into the processing, seeking to discover the insights for myself personally. And there are many. But I haven't yet gotten to the realization, which I think will come. How can my knowing what I now know, having seen what I have seen, be of use to others as well?
Yeah. Do you foresee yourself continuing on this journey of presidency and politics?
Well, I'm 72.
Mm-hmm.
If I was 50, possibly even 60, I might say yes. But in this situation, I think my age is an issue. Mm-hmm. I think that after everything that has happened this year, and there's obviously an understandable and legitimate impulse to allow a new generation in. At the same time, I think when it comes to the transformational issues that people like us discuss, it has less to do with physical age and more has to do with newness of ideas.
Right.
The generative consciousness. You can be a young person with old ideas.
Right.
I think the older you are, the more you know certain things. And the younger you are, the more you know certain other things.
Yeah.
So there's great intergenerational potential,
Yeah.
In terms of the transformational, issues economically, socially, and politically. I think one of the reasons age is helpful, if you do have a more transformational consciousness when it comes to political issues, is because people such as myself remember a time when the average American couple could afford a house. I actually remember it. It was in my experience of my lifetime. We didn't have anything when I was in my 20s, but you sort of didn't need to. We had hope. There was no reason for people in their 20s in the 1970s to not assume, oh, I'll get there. So there wasn't this rampant cynicism. The average American couple could afford a house and a yearly vacation and a car, could afford to send their kids to college. I remember that. That's a big deal. Too many people don't remember it. So it sounds like a fairy tale. And that's dangerous because it leads to lack of hope and cynicism and nihilism when you literally can't even imagine things being much different.
Right. Yeah, taking away that, in a sense, the traditional American dream is sort of evaporating in the current climate. And
well, I think there's something very important here. It has evaporated.
Yeah,
that's really important. You know, you hear the candidates talking about they want to build up the middle class. The question is, what middle class at this point?
Right.
I mean, when you see that there's been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth over the last 50 years from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 10, then this idea that it's evaporating, at what point do you realize, no, it's evaporated.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like when you have a friend who does drugs or drinks too much. At what point do you say, no, we have to do an intervention now? This is way beyond, oh, she was talking too much at dinner. This is, she drove away with the kids in the back seat.
Right.
Completely drunk. And I think that's really, and once again, those of us who have a transformational perspective, even what I just said, okay, that my analogy would be the dangers to American democracy are much like the dangers to the body when somebody is drinking too much or taking too many drugs, okay? Within the transformational field, that makes all the sense in the world. I saw you nodding. But within the political sector, that would be considered, what? What is she talking about? And yet I believe that it's that transformational perspective, which is the most necessary at this time. A kind of whole person, holistic mindset that alone will enable us to move into the area of root cause. That's why on my campaign, when some people would say, oh, she's not qualified, I actually think I was the most qualified. Because I think to be qualified today is to be more than a political car mechanic. To be qualified, you can hire those, and Washington is full of them. To be qualified today should mean someone who can really understand and have what it takes to articulate, no, we're on the wrong road.
Yeah.
We're on the wrong road. And I hope that the transformational community, you know, if you look at this historically, every field that we have entered, we have transformed. Healing, medicine, food, exercise, business, education. I mean, when the transformational perspective gets planted there, new blossoms everywhere. And the only reason we haven't transformed politics yet is because we haven't gone. And one of the things that was surprising and disappointing to me in both my campaigns was how many people within the transformational space, when it came to politics, would hold on to old think.
Yeah, right.
And whereas I hoped that more people would say, oh, wow, someone taking that perspective and applying it within political issues. Now, if you did, and then you questioned me about the issues that actually, of course, have to be part of it. What do you think of Ukraine? What do you think of Israel? What do you think of the economy? You know, what do you think of the tax structure? What do you think of, I mean, I have them. I have that down.
Yeah.
You know, and there's this almost Wizard of Oz feeling that people who are elected officials, they're like Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. What somebody needs to do is tear that curtain down.
Yeah.
And I had been around politicians enough, and sometimes at the highest level, that I got to say, oh my God, this really is Wizard of Oz people. They don't know anything more than anyone else does, and they spend half their time having to raise money. What are these secrets you think they have? And it's also very interesting because if you look at the US Constitution and what the founders said in many areas in the Constitution, what the founders did not say is as significant as what they did say. When it comes to being qualified for the presidency, it says you have to have been lived here for 14 years, you have to have been born here, and you have to be at least 35. Now that's very interesting. They did not say you had to have been a senator or a governor or a congressman, right? That was left to every generation to decide, what do you think is the most important skill set and expertise that we need a president to bring to the table at this time in order to answer the challenges of our time. Franklin Roosevelt said that the most important job of the presidency is not administrative, it's moral leadership. I thought it was so interesting when Kamala Harris was introducing at her rally yesterday or the day before, whenever it was, everything's moving so fast right now, when she introduced her vice presidential pick. Right. She went on and on about how he'd been a high school teacher and he'd been so inspirational to his students. He'd been so motivational to his students. He'd helped people see their potential. I thought, oh, right. So you're saying it's so important when in my case it was so woo-woo and unimportant. Right. But once again, Brandon, unless you have enough people, a critical mass of people who are willing to join you in the field of consciousness about whatever it is, then that person becomes a provocateur. And I like to think that I did plant some seeds, but a larger number of people are going to have to take this forward, or else the person who goes out there and says it is kind of on a limb, and it's far too lonely in certain situations.
It really reminds me of the story of the butterfly and its journey, which I imagine at some point you've heard how this caterpillar starts as the caterpillar and it destroys everything in its path, right? I was telling my mother about this and she's like, oh my gosh, yes, this caterpillar's just destroyed my geraniums and I'm so mad at them. And it's like, it just eats with reckless abandon. And then one day this Imaginelle cell pops up. And at first it's like, what is this invader? And it gets stamped out by the caterpillar cell. And then, hold on, another one pops up and then another. And then eventually, the first ones don't stand a chance, but eventually there's enough popping up that they start working together. And this is where a big transformation comes in, right? And the chrysalis the butterfly is born. And
the caterpillar literally disintegrates.
Right, that's right.
And that's what's happening to an old order today. Right. And then you have this imaginal soup. Yep. And if you don't, of those cells that you just mentioned, if you don't understand that pattern, then you think, oh my God, the whole thing's falling apart and we're in this soupy stuff. If you do have an understanding, you go, oh no, these are imaginal cells. A new world is being born from this. The butterfly will be here. And that's why, once again, we need a president of the United States who understands that story. Not just who would tell that story, but understands that story.
To me, it tells me, I always think of what will they look back on this time? And it's like, we look back on the Middle Ages or, oh my gosh, they were so primitive. I believe we'll look back in 1,000 years. Oh my gosh, Marianne was coming up at this moment and running for president. And she actually understood this idea that, the consciousness that animates my form is the consciousness that animates your form. The separation between us is illusory in nature. All is literally one, act accordingly. That is sort of, the underlying understanding, base level understanding that is lacking in politics today. And so,
well, I think that this time will be looked back on in many ways as barbaric.
Yeah, right.
We have so outpaced ourselves. Technologically, we're so advanced, and spiritually, we are so immature, collectively. Right. Not individually, and that's part of the sadness that I hold. I am deeply convinced in terms of where America is today, I saw this in 2020, and I saw it just as clearly in 24. The American people are not the problem. We're a decent people. We are an intelligent people. No better than anybody else, but no worse than anybody else. And I see in the American people a willingness and a readiness to be called to something noble. I think that we are hardwired to do great things. And I mean, that's the history of our country. And I think we kind of wilt when we're not called to do great things. So the problem that I encountered is not that people are not ready, but that the forces that don't really want transformation for their own ideological and financial purposes do what they feel they have to do, whatever is required to do to nullify the voice of anyone who is presenting to people the opportunity for a genuine transformational perspective.
Right. And it is really, it's, once you understand it the way obviously you do, and I think many people listening to the show, it's like there's nothing more important than getting that, that elephant in the room. Like, hey, whatever you're putting out, leader, there is no other, everywhere you go, you're there waiting for yourself to some degree. And until that's fully understood as is a base level operating sort of mechanism, I don't know. It's like, it's the most foundational thing.
The Course in Miracles says it's not up to you what you learn. It's merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. And I think that's as true for nations as it is true for an individual. All that a nation is a group of people. So if there are laws of consciousness that prevail within the life of an individual, they prevail within the law of a nation as well, and of a species. You attack, assault nature the way you do, you're insane not to believe that it will blow back in kind. I don't want to say insane, but ignorant of the law. There is natural law, and the primary natural law is for every action there's a reaction. And whether you call it the law of cause and effect or you call it karma, that's why the golden rule: what you do to others will be done unto you. What you do to the planet will be done unto you.
Yeah.
And if you apply that to world affairs.
Yeah. Gandhi said, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others. And the reason I believe that holds true was because there are no others. And
that's right. The Course says, do not look to yourself to find yourself, for you are not there.
Yeah.
And all this love yourself stuff. Jesus didn't come to the earth to say, love yourself. He said, love one another. And that is how we love ourselves. Once you realize you are me and I am you. Also another in line with what you were just saying about Gandhi, when they asked him, don't you want to run to be president of India? He said, the greatest service I can be to my country is to reduce myself to zero.
Becoming nobody, like Ram Dass.
It's the only way to be a somebody is to know that you're nobody.
Right. Well, this really leads me into your latest book and thinking about some systems that still need updating from my perspective, and I would imagine your perspective. You have organized religion right there with politics, some of the ideas around what Jesus was. And, I'm sitting here, and of course, as someone who, when I received your book, I live in a place, co-living in an event space we call the Mystic Manor. And I did a late night style show called Optimistic, spelled like your book, Mystic Jesus. And, I've been saying this to my father, who is very conservative, dogmatic, hell and brimstone Christian. It's like, Dad, Jesus was teaching the same thing that I'm saying. It was at a different time. I and the Father are one. You'll do greater things than I. With the faith of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain, And so your latest book, I'll show it here for those watching, Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love. I loved seeing that you went, of all the things that you could focus on, it's one that's so near and dear to my own path and journey. This idea that, Jesus was a man teaching. He wasn't a Christian. He was washing up. He wasn't saying worship me. He was washing other people's feet. And so, I'd love to just hear what the inspiration of the book was and what you'd like to share about it.
Well, first of all, how you introduced the topic was very interesting and I think very true. It's not just about politics. It's not just about institutional religion. It's about an historic phase transition in which an entire mindset is crumbling and the world that it has produced is crumbling and a new world is struggling to be born. And we're looking at all the areas, whether it has to do with institutional religion, whether it has to do with politics, economics, whether it has to do with medicine, whether it has to do with any of these areas. And we're saying, where are the things, just like an individuation of an individual. There's an individuation of a generation. There's the individuation of a species at this point. Where in how they did things before, is there something for us to use and to build on? And where are there ways they did things before or ways they saw things before that we realize have not produced genuinely evolutionary betterment, and we can cut the cord?
Yeah.
Now, in the transformational world, when it comes to spirituality, it's interesting because there's no problem. You could go to any higher consciousness conference today, and there might be pictures of Buddha on the wall, Krishna on the wall, all kinds of religious symbols. You'll notice you're not going to see a picture of Jesus on the wall, because there's such an association in many people's minds with the Jesus of your father, which for many people in the transformational world is now an unacceptable spiritual construct. It's loaded with dogma, doctrine, like you were saying, hellfire, brimstone, that people reject. But when it comes to Jesus and the entire Christian orientation, there's been a lot of realization among people, wait, I threw away the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
So what I wanted to do with this book, which is natural as a student of A Course in Miracles, is, since that book is filled with Christ-centered language, traditional Christian concepts, but used in very much different psychotherapeutically oriented ways. Just like you said to your dad, I and my father are one, the faith of a mustard seed. Just like you said to your father, that when you look at the actual spiritual nuggets of any mystical tradition, whether it's within Christianity or Islam or Judaism, what you find are universal spiritual themes that are at the heart of all of them. There's one truth spoken many different ways. So what I sought to do with this book is to mine the spiritual gold in really the very notion of Jesus. Because what many of us have been presented is, okay, it can go one of two ways. It can either be that he's the one Son of God, there is no other, traditional Christian theology and doctrine. And a lot of people in transformational will go, I don't know, I'm not interested. But then there's another interpretation, which is he was a great teacher, really no different than any other great teacher, or great symbolism. And from A Course in Miracles perspective, no, it's a little bit more than that. What does it mean that there's divine origin there? Not that he's the only one, because in the Course in Miracles, it does not claim he is the only one, but he is a portal. And what does that really mean? So that's what this book is about. And I hope that it helps kind of liberate for many people the kind of concept of Jesus, which has become kind of like when you go into a museum and there are these old musty glass cases, and our very idea of Jesus is sort of caught there, trapped there. And I hope that this book, first of all, the mystic tradition, esoteric mystical tradition of Jesus goes back to the beginning. I mean, there have been mystic, Teresa of Avila, and then the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's not like I'm talking about something nobody's talked about before. But I think looking at it fresh, particularly within the context of A Course in Miracles, has been everything for me. And I hope it will be for those who read the book.
Yeah, well said. I think of Jesus, as you stated, he was a man who came and embodied Christ consciousness, this idea, this path to reconnecting, remembering your divine origin, and so I personally view him as this, an enlightened being that showed up at this particular time, and when in Jesus is a man that lived and died and won't come back. Christ consciousness is what's coming back and going to proliferate our planet. And, you have more and more people thinking in this same terms and in speaking. I mean, having some of the concepts we've already discussed, we'd have been killed, in his time for saying, I'm one with the source consciousness that creates and animates all things. So that's my sort of take on it. And I'm curious your thoughts on that, this idea that he was a man who was fully enlightened, who embodied Christ consciousness. And when he said, I'll be coming back, it's more of a prophetic, I guess, view into what we're seeing now of a more of an awakening happening on our planet than in, I guess, recent centuries.
Yes, he is, according to A Course in Miracles, a man who embodied Christ consciousness. Carl Jung talked about the level of mind, where if you go deep enough into your mind, deep enough into mine, there's a level of mental imagery that he called archetypes. The esoteric idea of the Christ mind is the idea that you take that one step further, that if you go deep enough into your mind and deep enough into mine, we don't just share imagery, we are the same mind, like the hub of a wheel. We tend to identify with our position on the rim, in which case we're all different spokes, but they all lead down to that same source point, and that is the Christ, the mind out of which we all derive. You and I are trained on this world to think we all have the Christ within us because that's the unalterable creation of God. But we are trained by the thinking, the fear-based, i.e. non-loving thinking of the world, that we have so many layers of stuff on top of it. Whereas Jesus is someone for whom every perception, every feeling had been purified of anything but the Christ. That's why he said in the Course, I don't have anything you don't have. The difference between us is I don't have anything else. So he is that state of potential. He lived on the earth, but thought only the thoughts of heaven, the Course says. And heaven is an awareness of our oneness. Now, when you talked about the man not coming back or coming back, what the Course in Miracles says is, when he shall return, and then it puts in parentheses, when he shall be perceived. The Christ never left. What happened is that it has been eclipsed by shadows in front of the sun. And what are those shadows in front of the sun? The thoughts of judgment, the thoughts of guilt, the thoughts of attack, the thoughts of blame, the thoughts that we're separate, the thoughts of domination. All of the thoughts that are not love are like shadows before the sun. So what the Course in Miracles says is that Jesus, having achieved that state of pure, actualized potential, which lies within us all, the Course in Miracles says he was then, as it were, authorized by God. Should we request it? And only if we request it, because if we don't request it, it would be a violation of our free will. But if we do request it, he is given the power to literally overshadow, as it were. He says, my mind joined with your mind can shine away the ego. I'll give you an example. Let's say you and I are having a conversation, and I tell you, oh, I'm just really bothered by what that woman did. And you say to me, oh, come on, Marianne, we both know better. Lighten up, give it up. It's not that big a deal. Come on. And I go, you're so right. Thank you for reminding me. But what if you said that and my response was, the trigger is too big. The wound is too deep. The trauma in my life was too major. I can't just give it up.
Yeah.
And that's where Jesus is a way. Now, the Course in Miracles, once again, does not say he's the only one. That the door has many names on it, but his is a name. Jesus is a way to say, I know that you would see this situation differently. I know that that in you, there is no trigger here, that you really get that only love is real and nothing else exists. You get it, I get it intellectually, but I don't get it in my cells, but I am willing to see it differently. And I am willing for you to so flood my consciousness, my mind, my heart. And then the Course in Miracles says the miracle is a divine intercession from a thought system beyond our own, so that literally we are lifted. So you say, I can't see her innocence. I can't see their innocence. I can't get over what happened to me in the past, but I am willing to. And that's the miraculous nature of the whole thing. And I don't think anybody would argue that we could use a miracle on the planet right now, because, you know, they say in AA, your best thinking got you here.
Yeah.
Our best thinking got us here, and we are 6 inches away from the cliff.
Yeah. 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 I'm curious, Marianne, what your thoughts are on, you know, a lot of people look around and see the 6 inches from the cliff, and of course it paralyzes them with fear, and they feel so small and, you know, ineffectual. And how could I possibly make a difference? I'm on the ride and there's not a lot I can do. A lot of people have that feeling. And, you know, I personally, looking at it from I view my life through the perspective of the idea of potentials and timelines. And, you know, from this moment forward, I believe Source is infinite and therefore plays out all kinds of potentials from this moment forward, where, you know, there's maybe the worst case scenario and the best case scenario and everything in between. And I get to navigate which version of reality I step into with my own vibrational offering, if you will. And I know that's, you know, gets a pretty out there perspective, mainstream speaking, but I'm just curious, you know, for me, I find a lot of comfort in thinking, this is how I shift which realities I step into.
Well, first of all, remember who you're talking to. It wouldn't be considered out there to me. I write books about just what you said. So that's, and also you reminded me of a mistake that many women make, almost modifying what you were saying, almost apologizing for what you were saying. I know it's not how the mainstream sees it. Well, the mainstream, as we know, is what got us here. So we don't even have to stop to point that out anymore. Do you know what I'm saying? One of the first sentences in the Course is, there is no order of difficulty in miracles. So I agree with you. The Course in Miracles says God has an answer to every problem the moment the problem occurs. It's kind of like a GPS. If you take a wrong road, wrong turn, the GPS will automatically recalibrate. So a life of faith is not blind. A life of faith is visionary. A life of faith is one in which you say, according to my rational mind, I don't know how we're going to get out of this. Mm-hmm. My rational mind says we're cooked. And that's where a lot of people get so afraid and depressed and cynical. But for those with faith, you go, with my rational mind, I can't see it, but I know it's true because it's how the universe operates. There is no spot where God is not. There is no spot, no matter how dark, wherein there does not lie the potential of a miraculous healing and a miraculous beginning, new beginning. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the issue becomes our making of our lives instruments through which God can operate on the earth. Use me. Mm-hmm. You know, my favorite gospel song, use me, you know? But I also feel, having run for president, if you see somebody who represents, you know, many people would say, and we did get 500,000 votes, which, given how invisibilized we were, is no small thing.
Absolutely.
But so many people would say, oh, but she can't win, which is kind of ridiculous. Like, whoever you vote for is who wins. Yeah. Or fell into the ruse, she's a spoiler, which no, it was a primary. Or we don't primary an incumbent, which is ridiculous because people primaried Lyndon Johnson, and that was just part of a narrative. All these false narratives and the things they do. Everybody grow up now. The next time somebody walks into this space, use your best thinking. Mm-hmm. Use your own critical thinking. And don't so quickly acquiesce to really what amounts to psyops and character assassination and all the various ways that they use to try to throw you off the scent. Because if we do embrace genuinely transformational perspectives, the world that is so resistant to that is resistant because they know their empire of power, false power, the power of greed would be over. Right? So help this next person who does it, help them out here.
Yeah.
Help them out here. That would be my hope, that people, we have to wise up. And when you really see, like the Course in Miracles says, the ego is both suspicious at best and vicious at worst. And the collective ego is suspicious at best and vicious at worst as well. We have to be real grown-ups. You know, those of us in the transformational world have had it so easy. We were off in this little corner. We would do podcasts and write books and have tapes and teach classes. And the mainstream consciousness didn't really care about us, which was very convenient for us. Because within that came no larger responsibility than selling our books and having a good time and being with each other.
Yeah.
But I believe that we're called now to take what we have learned and extend it as a greater gift to the world itself. Not just in the fields that we have already touched and done incredible work, but I would hope we will take it into politics as well, because it is an unbelievably corrupt system.
Yeah.
More than people know. I mean, it's a ring of hell. It's like something out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting. But if the best among us, people dedicated to soulfulness and root cause and ethics, continue to leave that field to others, then it will only get worse rather than better. And I can tell you from my experience, it's already getting worse. And
just in the 4 years. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I appreciate you bringing up the don't apologize piece, because I think it's a great example of how much the pervading power structure sort of has over even someone like myself. Anyone hearing this podcast has heard me talk about some pretty wild concepts pretty confidently for a very long time. And in the moment of speaking, it's like, oh, this is a presidential candidate. I don't want to, say something that's too far over the edge that would maybe do harm to this person. But it's just, and then you snap me out of it like, hey.
And also, anybody who knows my career knows that that quote unquote wild stuff is what I've been building a career on for the last 40 years and writing books about. But also it's more than that, isn't it? It's that what we're saying is not wild. What we're saying is common sense.
Right.
The people who should be considered fringe are the people who are driving us so close to the cliff.
Right.
It should be considered by us wild that they are suggesting that the only people we should have lead us are the people who have had long careers driving the car that drove us into this ditch. That's what we should call wild, because they're now saying only the people who drive that car should be trusted leading us out of the ditch. That's wild.
Right. Makes no sense.
We are the reasonable ones.
Yeah.
We are the reasonable ones. The Course in Miracles says love restores reason and not the other way around.
Yeah.
And also, I don't need to point this out to you. Everything you're saying, even if it's 15 years ago might have been considered more wild, it's kind of part of mainstream consciousness now. It's just a perspective. And I think we need to own it.
Agreed.
And we need to claim it.
Agreed. Yeah. It's claiming, and I think that's a big part of what's holding us back. Those of us who are, let's say, on the tip of the spear of consciousness on the planet and helping to awaken the extensions of self, if you will, as we teach what we need to learn and do it ourselves. But I think a big part of the journey, and why I know from your book, A Return to Love, quote, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure, struck such a chord, because I think that is a part of the journey for all of us, is like claiming, like the days are over when we needed to hide in the cave and, get worried about, being beheaded or whatever happened in the past. It's now's the time to really claim our power. And I think that's what you're getting at. And there's no more hiding.
Well, for many of us, those days are not over, and particularly for women.
Mm-hmm.
I got running for president in a way that no man gets. Who do you think you are?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think you are? Vivek Ramaswamy had never served in office before. Bobby Kennedy's never served in office before. Andrew Yang has never served in office before. Right. But I was like, how dare you just saunter out here? You haven't been dog catcher. But if you look at the things that we've been talking about here today, no, what I have been doing is the experience that represents a kind of consciousness shift that is so necessary.
Right.
So, and that doesn't mean you don't need all the other technical issues, but they're not as complicated as people might think. Right. I've been in enough of those rooms to know. Yeah. So for women, I can assure you, Brandon, I might not get my head chopped off, although a woman in Saudi Arabia might.
Right.
A woman in Afghanistan might, and that's not nothing.
Yeah.
But in terms of having your character trashed, your career trashed, your personality demonized, yeah, I think that we unfortunately have a lot to be wary of. Now, I never experienced any of that in my career as a writer or a speaker in the transformational field. I never felt my being a woman in any way diminished my opportunities or twisted anybody's perception of me. But in politics, the male chauvinism, the misogyny, and many times expressed by women, I have to tell you.
Wow.
The casual lies that would be said about me that are just shocking, actually. And the unchallenged trashing of someone that I don't think would happen so much with men. However, I think the point is, and for that reason, when you said we don't have to worry anymore, no, we do. However, there's a way to fix that. Don't let her be there alone. Mm-hmm. That was what hurt me, actually, on a personal level. I've been in this field long enough that I would have expected more people to use their voices online.
Yeah.
I'm not even saying I agree with her politically, but this idea of who you've drawn, this is not who she is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not only chivalry among men, but sisterhood among women. And so when I think of, I hope the next time this happens, that would be an example. Don't be quiet while your sister is being trashed like that.
Yeah. Right.
Don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's almost like, with what you did, you stepped into such unfamiliar territory for those in the transformational community. It's kind of like, okay, she's out of our pond. I don't know what to say or do in that pond. So good luck,
Well, I don't know. I've seen enough of them now jumping on the Kamala train, and I'm like, well, what is,
Hold on. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's weird. It's a weird world. And I just applaud that you've done what you've done, and hopefully we only get better, and there's more Imaginell cells stepping into that arena.
The insight, yeah, and then the butterfly.
Yeah, right. Exactly. The
Imaginal soup out of which emerges the beauty of the butterfly.
Indeed.
And we're all in process.
Yeah, indeed.
We're all in process. I know for myself, so much to learn about yourself and others, so much to forgive in yourself and others. Talk about a spiritual challenge.
Yeah.
And that's why, Martin Luther King said, in order to change the world, we must have external changes in our circumstances and internal shifts in our souls. So some people might say, how do you run for president and write a book about Jesus and the mind of love? Well, easy, because it's going to take the inner and the outer.
Yeah. Right.
It's not either or.
Right.
It's both and.
Right.
And that's why I find that endlessly fascinating. How do we make our personal lives an instrument of love? How do we make public policy an instrument of love? To me, that's very exciting.
Yeah, my favorite quote is a little remix I made of John Lennon. Really, he said, "Love is the answer now. What was the question?" And it's so cliche and so true. And it's just like, what would Jesus do, right? What would love do? What is the most loving thing that we can do? And it's such a simple concept, and understanding it theoretically is one thing, and the application of it is a whole different ball of wax.
Exactly.
And
Exactly. Exactly. The Course in Miracles says enlightenment begins as an abstract understanding, but then it takes a journey without distance from the head to the heart. Just knowing it is easy enough. At this point, we've all read the same books, blah, blah, blah. Yep. But it's when life hits you.
Yeah, well, Mike Tyson
the rubber meets the road. It's very humbling. Like, I can't believe I blew that.
Yeah, I know. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back oftentimes. And Mike Tyson, I always quote him when referencing this concept. Everyone's got a plan till you get punched in the face. And life punches you in the face, and it's like all the spiritual knowledge is out the window. And then you like,
you're doing really well. You're doing really well. You're doing really well. Look, can you take this?
Yeah, exactly.
Not quite as enlightened as you thought you were there, huh?
Right.
Oh,
no. Get up and try again. That's all we can do, and continue to call each other up and forward and be the best example that we possibly can be. And oftentimes it's how you navigate the misstep and show up and are willing to bring humility and grace and accountability.
I think that's true. You learn as much from failure as you learn from success. And I think the only ultimate failure is failing to learn from something and to grow from it. Yeah. And certainly I'm dealing with that now.
Yeah.
It humbles you, but being humbled is a good thing.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Well, as we start to wind down here, this has been a fascinating conversation. I would like to bring a little Marianne magic into more Marianne magic into the mix here. I love, as you referenced, hearing stories of synchronicity or serendipity or a positive paranormal story. So I'm wondering what you have. It sounds like you already have something up your sleeve you'd like to share.
Well, it was in the 1980s, and there was a man named Jerry Jampolsky, and Dr. Jerry Jampolsky wrote the first popular book about the Course in Miracles. It was called Love is Letting Go of Fear. I was living in Los Angeles. I was giving a talk in San Francisco on a Thursday night. Now, in those days, I gave a talk in LA on Saturday mornings, Tuesday nights, and then Thursdays I would be in some other city, and then I would come back for the talk in LA on Saturday. It's a Thursday night. I have dinner with Jerry Jampolsky in San Francisco. He said to me, "You ought to write a book." I said, "About what?" He said, it's about your lectures, based on your lectures on A Course in Miracles. I said, "Well, other people have said that, but I don't feel pregnant with a book." He said, "It's all in those little cassette tapes you have." I said, "But I don't know how to get it out of the cassette tapes onto the page." He said to me, "Let's agree in consciousness right now." He put his arm up. He said, "Let's agree in consciousness right now that there is someone out there who will help you figure out how to get your ideas from your tapes onto the page." Okay, that was a Thursday night. That Saturday morning, I'm in LA giving a talk, after which a man comes up to me. This was before the internet. This was before phone recording machines or whatever. This man comes up to me. He says he's a literary agent. Have you thought about writing a book about these things? I said, I don't feel pregnant with a book. I don't know how to get it onto a page. He said, "I'm a literary agent." I said, "Oh, that's amazing." I gave him my phone number. Now, I don't know if he ever called. If he did, I never knew. If he didn't, he probably lived to be sorry. I don't know. So that was Saturday morning. Tuesday night, I spoke in LA, flew on Wednesday to New York. Thursday night, I gave a talk in New York. 1 week after Jerry Jampolsky said, "Let's agree in consciousness." After my talk, there's a line of people waiting to speak to me. I see a man at the end, and I just have a feeling I have destiny with him. He introduces himself. We shake hands. He said, I'm a literary agent. Have you thought about writing a book? I said, yeah, but I don't know how. He said, because it's all in your tapes. I said, I don't know how to get it from my tapes onto the page. He said, well, I can help you do that. Mm. He turned out to be the literary agent. That the Return to Love came from that. The fifth best-selling book in America that year.
Wow.
So Jerry Jampolsky said, so maybe there's someone here who just needs one person to agree with them that something's possible. And that's all it takes.
Yeah.
So if anybody is aided by that story, get somebody to agree with you. And two or more, the Course in Miracles says an idea grows stronger when it's shared. Get somebody to share your dream with you. Yeah. And if it really would serve the world, it will come to pass.
I love that. Yeah. I think speaking of Jesus and ideas, isn't it in the Bible where two or more are gathered in my name, I'll be there, right?
That's the point.
And that's really it. It's like getting together. It creates that field and setting that intention and even speaking it out loud. It's amazing when you do it and then you see results and you're like, why am I not doing more of this in my life? I think it's so that the ritualistic element of, whatever it is, whether it's some traditional ritual or something you make up on the fly with your friend, like it's so powerful. And I've seen it time and time again and reflected in such stories. And so it's so
could have had a miracle.
Yes. Such a miracle. You are definitely a miracle and such a gift to
Thank you.
The planet and to this podcast. I'm so grateful for you taking the time to come on. What is the best way? Yeah, you're welcome. What is the best way for people to continue to follow you, find the book, all the books, etc.?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, The Mystic Jesus. I'm at Marianne.com, Marianne.com. People who are interested in the ideas from the political campaign can go to Marianne2024.com because they remain online. But people interested in my spiritual classes and the books and so forth, that's Marianne.com. And I'm all over social media.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to close this out with my cliche closer, and it is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Marianne Williamson?
Love. All we needed was 1 second to give it and to receive it. Mm-hmm. And as you said yourself, often much easier said than done, but worth the effort.
Worth the effort. Fully agreed. Marianne, thank you again. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Yeah. And thank all of you out there for tuning in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts into another episode. Until next time, journey well.